Hey everybody there on YouTube land and whatever other alternative media sites I might post this video to eventually. Just wanted to let everyone know some crazy stuff coming up here in Canada. Finally, Don Cherry has managed to get I guess a podcast or whatnot, so hopefully Canadians will support him in that venture, and so that's a good thing. But this whole kind of Don Cherry thing I've noticed has really kind of set off a huge division culturally between Canadians. Mostly the ones that don't like hockey and the ones that are kind of traditional hockey, kind of like, families who, or people who like or are interested in it. It's kind of more of a cultural thing, really, here in Canada. I mean, even though they say that, like, curling is also our national sport, like, unless you got skin in the game, not a lot of people really watch that, unless you're, like, into swiffing. You got, like, a broom fetish. Oh, yeah. Just keep harder, yeah. That's what I like. Puts a whole new definition of getting your rocks off. But that's kind of interesting what's going on. There's been some people that have been protesting down at Sportsnet, which I think is great. But this whole thing what's going on with Trump in the States, I guess there's some speculation that he may have been poisoned. I guess one of his food tasters was ill reportedly, from what people are talking from certain sources in the alternative media community. So that should be interesting to see, if there's going to be anything from that. I mean, I think it's just kind of interesting right now. I think a lot of people who are watching what's going on, I mean, like, internationally, there's a lot of stuff going on. I mean, the Hong Kong protest, Bolivia, you name it, man. There's just pretty much Latin American countries right now are not doing too well. And it's kind of interesting because it's like, as much as I don't really like leftist governments and stuff like that, what's going on in, like, Bolivia or whatnot, that guy did look like Morales or whatever. Looks like he was actually kind of paying, he was actually improving the living conditions of his people or whatnot. And, overall, that's pretty good. I mean, a lot of Latin American countries will look for kind of more of that social leaning. It's kind of crazy how, like, the right wing, though, is, like, extremely right wing in those countries, and it's almost borderline fascist, and that's a little too far right for me. And but I mean, I understand that when you're in Latin America has had a long history of kind of American influence, CIA kind of infiltration and coup d'etats and stuff like that gets backed by not just the U.S. but UN agenda kind of countries. So it's kind of a really kind of a messed up kind of situation, and a lot of people are kind of, I don't know. I was on one of the smaller channels that I frequent. There was a bit of a discussion on critical thinker or chicken critical thinker, I think. Chicken think. I don't know. They're nice people. They're definitely talking about Canada and stuff like that. But there's a problem here in Canada, and it's this whole kind of movement for separation, kind of like a Western Wexit, they call it, the Western referendum. And I mean, it's an interesting, like, concept, and heck, I'd be for it if we could actually do it. But the problem is that it's impossible to do. The Queen's not going to let it happen. The Prime Minister sure as hell's not going to let it happen. And I mean, what kind of, like, if we're not the same kind of country, there's a lot of issues that could happen with the whole kind of oil production on a national level, the regulations, crap like that. I could definitely see it hitting the economy to a point where it could cause or trigger a potential, there's so many different things that are kind of a bubble right here in Canada right now, especially the housing market. It seems that Trudeau's solution to the mass immigration and the housing bubble is to keep bringing in more people and building more houses and stuff like that, but that keeps it at such a high price that it makes it to the point where regular people can't afford that crap. You need two people to go in with it, and even then they're spending about 30 years trying to pay off that death pledge, as the French call it. But actually they call it hypothèques, because literally mortgage is death pledge in translated English. But it's kind of crazy how just how everything's going, just to the point where, I think a lot of people, I've heard people that are saying, oh, we need to kind of like, calm down and kind of get our bearings kind of thing. But at the same time, it's like, no, I think we should get more angry. Like I'm a big guy. Like I have problems when people start attacking, because my mom, she's like, she's conservative thinking. And I think I had a lot to do with kind of like, well, opening our eyes to just how kind of corrupt and hypocritical the left has become, especially this democratic socialist here in Canada. It's just gotten to such a ridiculous level that it's laughable at best. And they it's crazy to think that just how much, like, it's like, I don't know what it is. It's like the left will, if it's like a Hollywood celebrity, like Katy Perry or Miley Cyrus or, any of those stupid idiots, or Cardi B or whatnot, when they want to like shake their ass and be total skanks and bang half of Hollywood, that's progressive. That's empowered women, girl power. You don't need a man. You can go bi and lesbian, which is pretty much what a lot of the millennial ladies are doing nowadays, and it's making them miserable. It's making them more to the point where they're in relationships with women who are just as emotional as they are, and that doesn't always work out too well. I mean, for some people it does, and hey, for me, I'm not one of those people that really give a shit about what people do behind closed doors, consenting adults. That's their business, but there's no doubt that it has definitely made this generation completely messed up, to the point where men are afraid to actually say anything to women, and well, the ones that are kind of more, and it's kind of one of those things where it's like, even if you do go out and say something, you always feel that kind of like possibility of rejection, crap like that. But I mean, that's always been in society. We've always had that kind of 80% of women going for, 20% of men kind of thing, and vice versa. But the thing is, it's definitely kind of came to a point in our society where the cultural Marxism and everything has just completely poisoned our society and culture. And I'm not saying that from like a far right or a far left view. I'm just saying, like, just seeing just how far the goalposts have been moved is just ridiculous over the years. I remember when the left was anti-war, and like the right was more neocon, but there's definitely a battle, well, with most, actually not just the states. You're seeing it in Brexit. There's UKIP and the Brexit Party have kind of have their things, and the Conservatives in the UK is kind of a joke right now with everything that's going on there. But you see in Hungary, different countries all around the world, they're kind of trying to and I find it's weird, because in like some countries, it's like the more lesser known, like in the news, between the whole culture war or whatnot, the kind of more right wing they are. Like I think the people who are in power in Bolivia are like saying like, oh, like ridiculously crazy race based stuff and like ideological stuff for like Christian crusades and all this crap. And I understand, yeah, okay, it's good to have it's good to be against the communism, the social justice warriors, the cultural Marxist crap that's going on out there. I mean, there was a time when I was in high school where social justice meant, like helping the homeless, making sure they don't close, shelters down and stuff like that in places where people really kind of need it, and also like working together with the communities to make sure that it's not a complete eyesore and you don't have people, who are homeless that are kind of screwing up and doing, like drugs and stuff like that, because you definitely need, like programs where they can, for people that do want to, and I'm not for one of those people who say, oh, we just round them up and execute them, or the left nowadays, which would think about probably turning them, get the scoops out and turning them into Soylent Greens, or at the same time you see people on the left who are kind of more about like the traditional, we need to like, give them housing and programs and stuff like that, and there's definitely a debate to be had about that. Because, as much as people, talk about people who are homeless that don't want to work and don't want to contribute to society, and mental illness and all that jazz. There's a lot of different things that equate into the equation. And another thing is, there's a majority of veterans, consist of, a good portion of veterans and people who have fallen through the cracks in the system who have served their country before, and I definitely don't think that their sacrifice should go unnoticed, and unappreciated, and it's sad to see how many people, you got this whole push for opiate, and I mean, like, I've done like a few some videos about the economic collapse series and societal manipulation, which is something I wanted to do but never really got into it. But I think it's just kind of obvious for anybody who isn't a hypocrite, is a free thinker, and regardless of whether or not you're middle of the road or right wing or whatever, sorry, I'm just recovering from a really bad sickness that kind of went through my house. But, it's kind of one of those things where it's like, sorry, where it's like the media, for example, has lost completely all objectivity, and I've said this many different times. And it's kind of scary for me to see how many people are jumping on authoritarian bandwagons. Like in the States, people that are for the Yang Gang, when he wants to pretty much have a state determination of whether what's fake news or not. And that's a very scary road to go down. And that's what kind of creeps me about these collectivists, is that they think that, it's like the government, like the first people on the left will be like, oh, I hate this government. It's so corrupt. It's so racist, or, let's use all the left's terms, like the patriarchy and all that crap. But then there's the same people that want to give their like patriarchy government bureaucracy. They want to increase it. They want to make less freedoms for regular people to be able to make their own way in life. They want everybody to be controlled to the point where, you can't eat beef on a regular basis. You have to, like, you get it maybe once a year if you're lucky. Like, all these, like, technocrats that they're trying to push is crazy. It's pretty much just, like, selling you. It's like taking a futuristic version of 1984, Brave New World, or like a concoction of all that in the Fahrenheit 451, I think. Is that what it is? But oh my god, it's crazy just how much these people are going authoritarian. And, I mean, just look at Tim Pool, for example. Like, I find him, like, just because he's like, I'm a leftist, and even though he's still middle of the road, and he tries to be like, oh, well, he won't, like, go down logical paths that are obvious to anybody that has a brain. I mean, he'll be out there and call people out, and I do believe that it's a good thing. Like, what he had on the Joe Rogan's show, I definitely give Tim Pool credit for that, because he has some definite, he really put their feet to the fire, which I got to give him credit for that. But when I watch his videos regularly, I mean, I think, like, his own people are kind of, like, making fun of him for just, like, how he's, like, not really technically a leftist anymore, how he's kind of, like, been pushed to, like, middle of a centrist to, like, maybe even, some could even argue, a little tad bit sliver to the right, just because everyone else on the left has gone completely batshit crazy. And, what I don't understand is the difference between people on the right and people on the left. When you try to talk to people on the left, they are actually, I believe, a lot more possessed by animus than people on the right. I mean, hey, you get the people that are, like 100%, we need to go to war with all these different countries that we don't have any, and that kind of, like, take for example, the Bush years. Republicans were either, well, you're either with us or you're against us kind of thing. But I think a lot of Republicans now have changed, and that's why I do believe that there is a huge kind of an infighting between that kind of, between the gropers, the American First people, and the neoconservatives. Just because, well, the neoconservatives, they want to get as much skin into the game as they can to try to get as many people over to their side. And, it's worked great for Ben Shapiro. I mean, I like Ben's, where he's, like, destroying, people from social justice warriors and stuff like that. And it's kind of interesting, to see just kind of like anybody who's really on the right now. It's like it's easier for them to kind of talk about their ideas because they have no problem saying it. Like, I mean, nobody's gonna, maybe like some of the people behind Ben Shapiro or like some of the people out there who are backing them financially, like the Edelsteins and the, the APACs and all that crap. I mean, I from myself, when it comes to the whole Israel thing, I mean, it's kind of messed up that the U.S. is spending like $11 million a week or whatnot when they have people starving, and so I understand that argument. But at the same time, too, like the whole Palestinian and Israel thing, I mean, it's definitely got a lot of religious significance. So the people who are usually Christian, conservative, Republican, are usually the ones that think that we should definitely, be like even rebuild the Temple of Solomon. Like they're that pretty much against the whole Islam, like the whole Palestinian thing and all that jazz. And it seems that like, one of my criticisms of Trump is that it's kind of funny because, like, when he started coming out and saying when he was running that he was going to be, like, he was going to make peace in the Middle East, I definitely knew that he was kind of, he wasn't being completely honest. Because it's like, you're never going to be able to appease both sides unless you, like, kowtow to both. And as soon as as soon as he said that he would build the embassy, which, hey, you know what? A lot of presidents beforehand have promised but never delivered on, which is a good thing. I mean, it showed that he actually was serious about what he was doing, but, obviously that inflamed the Palestinian side, and, that would definitely end any kind of possibility of there being peace, aside from, wiping out the Palestinians. And, for me, I mean, I was always kind of more of a two-state kind of person myself, but, I mean, I just don't really understand why after, like, years of, getting genocided and crap, like, okay, there's people out there on the far right that are definitely gonna, have a few things to say about that, but I definitely believe that the Holocaust happened, and it was horrible, but at the same time, it's like, I'm seeing that Zionist. I don't like to generalize an entire group of people or anything like that, but the people that are in Israel, the Zionists that are destroying like Palestinian settlements and crap like that. I mean, you could definitely see over the last 30 years that the areas where the Palestinians have been living in have gone down and shrunk considerably, to the point where it's like, I understand where they're kind of in a culture where they're always kind of like in the victimhood mentality because they're being fed that way, and, there's times where, but at the same time, it's like, a legitimate form of protest, a peaceful protest is not throwing, like, rocks at freaking soldiers and stuff like that. One, they have guns. Two, yeah, I understand the whole spirit of it, but, that's why I have a problem with, like, leftist organizations like Democracy Now! And stuff like that, that used to be, like, somewhat objective, but now, like, aside from like maybe a video once every 2 weeks they'll come out with, that's something that isn't completely biased or completely filled, pandered towards social justice warriors. And a lot of that has to come with their financial backing too. I mean, they've definitely taken money from Soros and other organizations over the years. I mean, TYT takes money from Gulf state dictators and stuff like that, as much as they try to say in that little altercation he had between Roger Stone and I've actually, like, I've never seen such hypocrisy with Cenk after, all these years of him talking about how the court system's just and how unjust and how they railroad people politically and how there's all this, like, there's all this bias and racism and hatred behind the legal system. Completely fine with laughing on bulldogging on camera about how Roger Stone deserves to rot in jail and all that stuff, and just the vitriol and hypocrisy from the left is just, it's gotten to the point where it's really obvious for me. And like I said, in many videos I've been kind of pushed towards more of the right-leaning political kind of ideology. I've always been more libertarian myself. I've always been anti-authoritarian. But at the same time, I'm starting to see that that especially in the States is where I definitely believe the possibility of a civil war might occur. I've noticed a lot of stuff here in Canada, this whole push for Wexit, all this stuff here. To be honest with you, I don't believe that Canadians are going to go for it. I mean, I understand that the hard-producing people in certain, provinces are definitely, sick of getting... I mean, like the East Coast here in Canada, there was a time where they actually did have... Like, they were self-sustaining. But the problem with the East Coast here in Canada is that with the kind of like crazy weather that they get out there, and also the crazy, I mean, it was always mostly a mining and fishing kind of like that was most of the industry was coming from and like supporting them back in the day. So they were very strong different provinces out there, even though Newfoundland was kind of going bankrupt around like the 60s, and I think they joined in the late 60s. I believe it's 68 or 69 or whatnot, but there was always a relatively strong fishing sector out there. And what happened was the government of Canada kind of stepped in and started heavily regulating things to the point where it was just to the point where people couldn't like businesses couldn't make money out there. And it's kind of funny because they put all these regulations and quotas and stuff on what they could catch out there, but yet 100 to 200 miles east of Newfoundland and of Canada, you're in international waters, and that doesn't stop the fishing vessels from out there from completely taking all the fish out there and like deep sea, like dragging the nets on the bottom of the ocean floor to get whatever they can. And so a lot of that stuff is kind of hurt us, and the fact that we can't compete is horrible for people. And so that has kind of been a way that the Liberals have been able to garner votes out in the East Coast. And for Canada to, I mean, like, the East Coast of Canada is a severe problem. It's definitely seeming that, like, they've been putting a good majority of some of the refugees, and whether or not you believe that they're fake or whatnot, I definitely would agree that, due to, I've been more convinced by work from Rebel Media, where they got a Freedom of Information request, where they found out that they weren't even really vetting a lot of these people that were coming in. They weren't giving them a question seat. It was just a total, with John McCallum, that little freaking gremlin. It was just pretty much just a photo op, really. That's what it was for our wonderful Syrian refugees, which were actually living in Turkey in apartment buildings and being completely cared for. They weren't in any kind of really bad situation. We just decided to take a bunch of them over here as a liberal sacrament, to make our, all of our bleeding hearts happy. And I don't think they really realize how bad it is. And I think Canada is kind of in a place where I'm seeing a lot of people that are talking about Wexit and stuff like that, but I just don't believe that Canada's going to have the political balls to do it. Let's be honest. We voted for Trudeau again. And, I mean, this is a guy who multiple ethics violations, more than any other prime minister in history. Just imagine, like, Trump. Like, I've said this before, but this is a good comparison because I'm a person who hates double standards. I think we should have one rule of law for everybody and one system where, I'm not going to take a state-run broadcast like CBC seriously if they won't even show another side of the argument. Like, I think it's kind of funny when they keep talking about this whole Trump impeachment thing. And, like, all they are doing is going from the Democratic side and being like, oh, the Republican story is shaky ground, blah, 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 blah. It's like, how about the fact that it's been a almost 4-year witch hunt? Even like the year before he decided to run, they were, attacking him relentlessly, and Republicans back in the day were even worse. They were the worst ones to stab in the back. And I just think it's kind of funny because, when my mom, like, she was online and she said, I like the Trumps, and, Melania is a classy lady. And then I think it's funny how just all these hypocritical leftists is like, oh, she's a classy lady, huh? And so they post all of her little model pictures and stuff like that. It's like, she was a model, man. Like, that's what they do. They're, they have a beautiful physical form. They offer a lot of beauty. That's their career. And I think it's funny because if it was Miley Cyrus in this level, like I was saying before, or any other kind of leftist celebrity, then, like they wouldn't be saying, oh, well, she shouldn't be the first lady or whatnot. They'd be completely on board with it. And that's what I hate about the hypocrisy of the left or whatnot. I'm actually finding, like, when you go to, like, protests or when I'm watching videos of protests from all kinds of different sources, and people who aren't even, like, really so much as, like, they're just more there to report the protests and stuff, I see more often than not the, conservatives that want to have a debate, because they know that pretty much the whole cultural Marxist theory is just kind of a joke itself and doesn't really, like they know the history of communism and socialism and how it fails. And so once you start talking those kind of facts, those economic harsh realities that the left won't even like think about, that's when you kind of start to see that at protests, just the amount of people that will come over at any kind of protest, even here in Canada, I'm seeing it with the yellow vest, like you get people on the left, usually professors that are running everything, and they'll come over and they'll say, oh, no, you can't talk to that person. Oh, you shouldn't talk to him. They're racist. Oh, they're evil. They'll use their own buzzwords instead of using the Socratic method. And I'm sorry, but as soon as you do that, and it's shown on camera, you've lost the argument. If you can't actually debate with somebody and you're just out there with, and it's looking that a good portion of these people may even be paid protesters. I mean, they've been caught many different times on Craigslist and whatnot, but you won't see any, Republicans or conservatives out there putting any call out, to pay for protesters or whatnot. I mean, I'm sure it may actually happen, but from all the videos that I've seen, it's definitely not the case. And most conservatives are people leaning center, even like classical liberals I see out there. Like Tim Pool many times have like tried to go out there and talk to people, or like Sargon or there's a lot of different people out there that try to keep in the middle of the road politically. And I mean, it makes sense nowadays because you don't want to go too far left or too far right because, you start getting into some really kind of twisted ideology and you start looking at people, as like kind of subhumans when you go too far communist and when you go too far fascist, and it's so I mean, for me, I'm about like the whole kind of anti-authoritarian center-right libertarianism. I like that idea. I believe that we still need to have a border, and I do believe that we should support our veterans because they're the ones that serve our country and sacrifice the most and put their lives on the line. At the same time, I don't believe in neocon agendas where we send these people willy-nilly to make profit for people that don't give a damn about them. It's definitely not going to help the democracy. It's not going to help, our role in the general overall things. People aren't going to we're not going to have any credibility as Western nations if we keep thinking that every country that we don't like or votes Democratic elected people based on what the people of that country says, and then we sponsor a coup or whatnot. And I'm not saying we as like the West, as if everybody in the West shares the same kind of the same kind of mentality as people in the deep state, because they're the ones that are definitely pulling the strings. And I think it's kind of funny because I remember like years ago where anybody who even talked about the deep state or talked about globalism, especially before, like within the last 5 years. I mean, 5 years ago, I was called a conspiracy theorist and laughed right out of this. Well, not laughed out. I mean, I still put up with it. I was just kind of like, I was in a place where I was kind of like doing volunteer work, and we were talking about politics and everything like that, and it was kind of more like, oh, you're one of those people, oh, the globalist, oh yeah, we're gonna get taken by the globalist, like I used to get made fun of all the time by people. And so it's kind of just showed you that we've been vindicated for one, because like, just look at the Trump presidency. I know a lot of people, and this is what I don't understand, is it's like, it's definitely a brainwashing, and there's no other way to say it, because it's so trendy now to hate Trump. I mean, like, I have unrelated things from politics that I do as hobbies, which I'm doing right now. And I talk to people who just kind of automatically think it's funny to bash Trump. And I don't laugh at their jokes unless it is something that's actually kind of funny, that is lighthearted, and, because the thing about comedy is that it has to have a little hint of truth in there. If it's a good joke and it burns Trump and it's funny or whatnot, but it's not like something that makes him turn into be the worst person ever, I'll laugh or whatnot. But at the same time, that's because I believe that most politicians are corrupt, and I actually kind of like the fact that Trump's actually done a lot. He's accomplished a lot of the things that he said he's going to do. And the things that he hasn't been able to do that he's been trying to do, as the only reason why it's a failure is because he's had so much opposition in a lot of regards. Now, the people he surrounded himself with, Pompeo, Bolton, stuff like that. I understand he kind of, like, a lot of people criticize him for that. And overall, it's not going to look good for him, by the time the election comes around, or even by the end of his second term, hopefully, God willing. I'm not religious, but, hopefully there's somebody out there looking out for us. Because, as much as Trump has his faults, if you look at a lot of different countries, a lot of the main countries out there, there's a lot of countries that are very far behind in this whole awakening against globalism and the taking away of sovereignty, the making of different laws by other countries, the pushing on these climate change. Hey, you want to, clean up pollution? Let's work on something like that with the UN or something, like a global initiative where, we can all pitch in a little bit of money and clean up the oceans and stuff like that. That makes a lot of sense to me. I think a lot of people would be cool with that. But instead, look how just they subverted it. Like, they took the whole plastic thing and they turned it into Earth. It was all on Earth Day, I think, of last year that it came out with the whole plastic straw thing. And they used such a infantile. They used some kindergartner's thing as and then it becomes into this whole, Western first world nations need to ban plastic bags and plastic straws and stuff like that. And that's just stupid to me, because the main pollution is coming from China and India, and nobody's saying anything about it. I think it's funny how when I talk to people, they're like, oh no, China's doing it. No, they're not. What China says and what China does are completely two opposite things. They know that there's nobody there that's going to hold them accountable in the UN. They don't care. They never cared. They won't even tell us their fucking GDP accurately. How are you supposed to, believe a country that's an amalgamation of, the most Orwellian social control mechanisms that you could possibly imagine in a freaking civilization? They are, the worst people ever to try to, virtue signal or say, oh, this is how we're gonna lead the world. And they don't give a damn about their own people. They don't give a damn about their environment. This whole, cutting off our energy sector was completely to their benefit. The manufacturing jobs under NAFTA. And this is what I don't understand, too, is that both the left and the right establishment, presidents, prime ministers, leaders of the world, have all been for NAFTA. They were completely okay, China, take our manufacturing jobs. Take away the main wealth that we have to produce and keep ourselves going for our own economy. Because what the whole thing about globalization, the modern globalization, globalization back in the day used to be the Silk Road, way back. And that, made just amazing amounts of trade between East and West. And, they didn't have, there was even, because of the distance, there were traders that never saw China that were Roman, but they had tons of Chinese goods, and vice versa. It was something that definitely strengthened civilizations and was a benefit, because you're getting access to new ideas, you're getting access to new technology, you're getting access to new things that you've never experienced or had before. And so obviously, whether or not it gets filtered to the regular people, the average people or whatnot, or it stays as something that is a commodity only for the upper class, it still makes its way into the society. When you look at Romans, for example, when it comes to silk, which was a very sought after commodity. And so it's just kind of interesting to see how modern globalization now, what they'll do is that they'll take certain countries and they'll be like, let's say if a country is good at producing something or has a lot of resources or whatnot. Well, what they'll do is the UN will be like, okay, what's the cheapest way and the biggest way that we can get the most amount of production out of this? And so what they'll do is they'll take a country like Iceland, for example. Iceland always been known for the fishing, and the fact that they have a really good fishing area is because of the volcanic, the different minerals, the ocean currents, everything that where Iceland is located makes it perfect for a good amount of fishing. That, I mean, they were able to write off the debt that they apparently owed the IMF and the World Bank and all that crap, and practically paid it off with fish. And so now that they're still technically part of the EU, because if you look at the way that they've got their fisheries set up, the UN is actually using more of Iceland fishing to practically, I mean, take the UK for example, England. I mean, if you're talking about a country that's out of all the countries in the world that are known for fish and chips, I mean, it's definitely a British thing. But the thing is, even though England has had really good fishing, all they have to do is just go west off of Ireland or whatnot, and there's plenty of fish abundant there. But the thing is, they've practically been taken over by the UN law and EU Parliament, so that they're not even able to fish in their own waters anymore. Well, they are, but to a very limited degree of what they can do. And they've practically turned the tap off, the EU, on the UK economy when it comes to fishing. And that's something that is practically designed. It's something that is what globalism is meant to do. It's meant to take places that have like certain areas where they produce the most, and they'll selectively allow winners and losers. And when that happens, it hurts the economies of those individual nations. And a lot of the times, like we've seen, they made the decision way back in the day. And as much as I say they, I mean, this is both the establishment, left and right, people who have followed the EU, the Cloward and Piven, kind of plans on how to implement this whole technological fascist kind of tyranny that they want to implement. And so what that does is that it takes away the ability for certain countries to be able to have a somewhat well-rounded balanced economy. So like there's people in all kinds of different trades, and there's an amount of demand for all the products or services that they're providing to the community or to their country. And so that's what we see with, and the thing about the left and this whole kind of socialism thing is that they seriously want to, limit the amount of what we can do on a daily basis, what we can eat, what we can, where we can live, pretty much what we can consume or whatnot, which is, I mean, there's always downsides of a consumerism, but at the same time, it's allowed a lot of allowed a lot of people to be productive. A lot of people that have been able to do really well in society because of that system that they have there, because it's the more you work, the harder, and a lot of people will complain and say, well, technically the more you work, the more it doesn't always equal to the more successful and happy and financially secure you are in life. But it's definitely a good indicator. It gives you that the problem is we've had a lot of the wealth that's been siphoned too. But I mean, that's why I don't understand this whole kind of boomer thing. It's like, okay, boomer. Well, it's like, yeah, okay, the boomers that are making money off of pretty much buying up real estate and riding that bubble are definitely not helping their kids at all. But at the same time, it's these policies that have been put in for a long period of time to make it so that the only way that people in their 40s and 50s can really make money nowadays is to, through certain types of investments and mostly real estate and stuff like that. I mean, for me, I like to see them go more into silver and gold, but I mean, gold's been going up because of this whole instability and whatnot. But I mean, I think it really comes down to I do believe that the bubble is going to pop eventually. And I think that's the only time that people will actually, around the world, will be like, oh crap, we need to come up with something new. And my fear is that communism is going to be, touted as the thing that's going to save, once the, economic crash comes down. The thing is, though, if the money's already valueless anyways, you're just going to be allowing more of a centralization control grid more than you are going to be able to allow an equality of living or whatnot, or this whole, leftist utopia, which is a total fallacy. And, right now, socialism isn't sustainable whatsoever. Just look at how much money is siphoned from the taxes that are actually collected to pay off private banks, to pay off something that we only like originally borrowed a very small percentage of, that we're still paying back because we're indebted to these private banking institutions, part of this whole centralized scheme where it's just a debt-based spiral, where every dollar that's printed has a certain amount of percentage of debt attributed to it. So no matter how much money you print, you're never going to be able to pay it off. And it's kind of designed that way in a certain way, where we're supposed to get so far in debt where the state and the banking institutions take over, they get rid of money, they put us into a cashless kind of situation where, if they don't like you, they could just deny you from the system, and then you're screwed pretty much, And it's kind of like one of the things that they say about the Bible with the mark of the beast and stuff like that. So have it. It's definitely kind of an interesting how we've kind of made it a self-fulfilling prophecy, whether or not you believe it's religious or not. For me, I'm agnostic. I keep an open mind. I'd like to think that evil people get punished in the long run, for doing evil things, and that, all these pedophile networks that seem to be running the world, will end up burning in hell. It's a nice thought, because there's certainly not a lot of justice that's going on in the world nowadays. What they did to Roger Stone, just ridiculous. Roger Stone went a little crazy there and started saying a few things in, emails and in between, talking to people and stuff like that I guess could be possibly construed as witness tampering. But, it was also, at the same time, they were trying to get, opposition research on the Clintons, and everybody was trying to get a hold of Assange at that time. And I think it's weird how, the trial was pretty much not allowing him to defend himself, not allowing him to put out the points that a lot of the crap that they tried to say about the whole Russia hacking was not true. He wasn't able to say that, that it's actually uncorroborated that it was the Russians that gave the information for the WikiLeaks, so the John Podesta emails and the FBI leaks and all that stuff to Assange. There's no evidence to suggest that. In fact, there's actually more evidence to suggest that by William Binney, who was head of the NSA at one point, that the amount of data that transferred and the amount of time that the hack took place in could not have been done over broadband. It had to have been done at the actual location. And they've had people who were actually real whistleblowers. And that's what I think is kind of funny, is that, what's this whole kind of, fascination with protecting whistleblowers all of a sudden? We're talking about Obama administration beforehand that did nothing but prosecute and go after whistleblowers and treated them like they were legitimate terrorists. And Edward Snowden, he kind of does seem like a limited hangout, because he seems like he's one of those guys who, he's given us a lot of information about how, the U.S. can, pretty much disguise itself, and all the crazy tools that they have to spy on us and screw us over, and to pretend that they're different, Russian hackers and stuff like that. But it's at the same time, it's it seems that he's one of those people that are it's he doesn't want to say too many bad things about the FBI or whatnot, because I feel like he secretly wants to come back at one point. And so he's kind of minding what he's saying. And that's what I think he's doing right now, is just lip service to the deep state, where he's saying, oh yeah, there's some corruption and blah, 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 and I'm a whistleblower, blah, 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 blah. I watched the Joe Rogan show, and then he's talking about how there's no aliens or no chemtrails. And okay, I know for a fact that there's chemtrails out there. Like, one, just go outside. It's pretty easy to freaking tell on certain days. And it always happens to be sprayed in the freaking morning in these, like, freaking, like, back and forth grid lines. They do it out here in Woodstock on a regular basis, mostly because it's a very agricultural area, so I wouldn't be surprised that they're doing stuff like that. But it's kind of crazy how, I mean, like, even John Brennan has, like, I mean, if you want to find out what's really going on with the globalists, and this is what I say to a lot of people that are kind of like, oh, I don't believe you, like, there's no, like, group that's running things, like, government's corrupt and, like, you know, like, they're too stupid to come up with stuff like that. I get these, like, answers from people all the time, right, saying, oh, there couldn't be anything like that. But, I mean, I think people are starting to wake up with this whole kind of Jeffrey Epstein thing, the pedophile connections. Prince Andrew saying that he can't sweat. Well, I'm sure he's sweating now. And, you know, I mean, it's kind of interesting how, I mean, if you go back to even Jimmy Savile and Prince Charles, I mean, it looks like the Queen's sons are a bunch of pedophiles. It's pretty messed up, but it's true. And the fact that the BBC, the UK government, has protected pedophiles for years, for decades, and now that they've, like, found out that, I mean, they wanted to do a huge investigation of Parliament, and they ended up blocking that because they don't want to, you know, ruin the public's trust in the monarchy and the parliament system. Just completely messed up how, you know, it's the little kids that have to suffer from that shit. I'm totally against that stuff. I mean, I'm pretty, like, down to earth or whatnot, but I get, like, I feel like I want to murder people who you know, who freaking hurt children and stuff like that. And I mean, it's crazy to see just how much pedophiliaism is being, you know, championed. You know, you got drag queen story hours where they're, like, having kids riding on them when they're half naked and crap like that. You got ones where they're, like, they're completely naked aside from they've just put glitter on their junk. Like, what kind of crazy stuff is that? And you know what? The good thing is, it's not as if it's like, you know, like thousands and thousands of kids that are going to drag queen story hours. But at the same time, it's like, you know, it's kind of like, how are we supposed to balance that whole kind of, like, you know, you get those odd kids that are kind of weird. Like, my brother was gay. He was, like, he's gay. But he was always super feminine. Like, when we were young, he'd always, like, play with my sister's Barbies. And, like, even though there was, like, a 12-year difference between me and him, there was an 8-year difference between me and my sister. And so, therefore, a 4-year difference between them. So they bonded more. You know, he was always interested in, like, her kind of toys and playing with Barbies and putting on dresses and stuff like that, right? But, you know, he never went tranny. He was just, like, you know, gay and whatnot. And so I completely support his, you know, like, he's a good kid. He never hurts anybody. In fact, he used to get picked on a lot because he was a really kind of feminine kind of kid. And I always tried to, like, you know, try to nudge him a bit into sports and stuff like that. But he was never really interested in that. And so we never really had as much of a brotherly bond as I would have liked. But, I mean, I still love him. I still respect him. And he's a good kid. And, you know, he's also musically talented, too, so you know, hopefully everything goes well for him in the future and all that jazz, because he's, you know, I wish him nothing but the best in life. And so, you know, at the same time, I've definitely noticed that, like, a lot of the music, the entertainment, media, everything like that has definitely kind of brainwashed my brother and sister, even though they're younger than me, into believing into this whole celebrity worship, that everything they say has value. And really all they're doing is just parroting stuff that they're being told to say. Because God forbid you go against the Hollywood narrative nowadays. And before it wasn't so much of a thing. You can have that kind of thing in entertainment where, you know, and a lot of that's thanks to cancer culture. It's thanks to this whole kind of manipulation of especially younger generation's mind. And I'm kind of glad that there's a bit of a backlash with some of the younger generation. I believe the Generation Z or something like that. The ones after millennials and after that, you know, that are still technologically, you know, kind of like the TikTok, you know, generation pretty much. That's kind of like seeing it for what it is and is kind of like making fun of it and poking, you know, they may not understand the reasons why they're poking fun at all this authoritarianism, But they, I mean, there's always going to be that anti-authority group and people. And the sad thing is, there should be more people that are standing up to this. But I do believe that the way kind of society is kind of softened a lot of the people in the West. I mean, a lot of people believe that just because they're white, they're inherently guilty for all of the problems that somebody did generations ago. It's ridiculous. It's this whole kind of collectivist blaming that I think a lot of people are kind of just getting sick of in some regards, but at the same time they're still controlled by those like parameters. Like if you start talking about any kind of race-based statistics for mass immigration, for example, and how it hasn't worked out for a lot of different countries, then you have to tread lightly. Even if you say that men are not women, apparently that's a thing now, and so apparently there's a whole thing between the whole trans athletes thing, and South Park made fun of it, and everyone and the social justice warriors lose their minds. But the thing is, when do social justice warriors now on Twitter not lose their minds? I mean, my mom is the nicest person that you'll ever meet. And she's such a people person. But, she makes a couple comments supporting Trump or Melania or whatnot, and, all hell breaks loose by the left. I mean, like, the same people that are total hypocrites. Because if it was, when it was a Michelle Obama, oh, she's such an empowered woman, whether or not she has a 10-inch trouser snake hiding underneath that dress of hers is, remains to be seen. And whether or not those kids are actually Obama's. I don't know. There's a few things that have been said. I've seen some videos where it looks like she's packing a roll of quarters in there, man. And there's also other people that have actually came out and said that they were in like the men's washroom and she came in there and whipped her trouser snake out. But whether or not those claims are true, I mean, who knows? And at this point, who cares? Michelle Obama to me will always be known as the lady who completely ruined the lunch cafeteria food for like almost a generation of kids that are going to be voting probably for Trump. But I mean, it's just one of those things where it's there's not really a whole lot you can do about it, really. So unfortunately, but yeah, I mean, it's definitely a polarization. It's a hatred that's gotten to a point where there's not really a whole lot that we can do about the polarization. I mean, it comes down to the media, it comes down to the cultural Marxist infiltration of our schools and educational institutions, scientific institutions, where people who are actually trying to do real science are getting, real science, because now even science is completely politicized. Like they'll claim, because you don't believe in climate change? What? I think it's funny when they say, you don't believe in climate change to people who are skeptical about man-made climate change and this whole thing that's going on. I mean, for me, I think it's an interesting debate, but there's a few things that will never come into mind in an argument when you're talking to people about climate change. One, if you tell them that the climate has and will and continue to change, they'll freak out. They'll be like, "Oh, you're just denying the whole hard facts. Venice is thinking, oh, what are we gonna do? We need to tax everyone." It's like, okay, you want to get into that argument without actually being like, "Oh, the consensus." It's like, when has science ever been a consensus? I mean, when Einstein came out with a theory of relativity, I've used this example many times before in my videos, but when he first came out with a theory of relativity, it was very shocking to the minds of the time. I mean, the Lord Kelvins, the established, scientific establishment, they spent a ridiculous amount of money in the first many few years when he first came out with a theory of relativity, trying to debunk him, and they spent so much resources trying to say that he was like, that this idea was ridiculous. But sure enough, he just was like, okay, well, it only would have taken one of you scientists to be able to officially debunk my theory, and sure enough, once the atomic production and the Manhattan Project came out and they found out that, E equals MC squared, then, obviously they had no problem with that. And I mean, there was obviously other things that he proposed too that people were on board before the whole making of the atomic bomb. But let's not forget that a lot of what he had to, that main equation was pretty much the basis of what kind of, kicked off the whole World War II, and eventually, we won. So, it's a sad thing. It's definitely a destructive, it's one of those things where we take things that we could use for the benefit of humanity and we turn them into death machines. That's just kind of the thing. We elect pedophile, psychopaths that run the world. And in some regards, it's good that we have alphas, alpha badasses. But at the same time, it's kind of not really good because, most people that give a damn about the fact that what they may do may kill the entire planet will be a little bit more kind of like reserved and think, okay, well, if we do this, then it's gonna hurt us all, But it doesn't seem the case when you have people like Bolton. The whole entire time he wanted, to go to war with Russia. And Nikki Haley, as much as she kind of came out and was like saying, "Oh no, Trump was nice. He never did anything," and then she comes around and starts stabbing him back a couple times. It's how politics is. And I don't think Trump really realized that. I think that's one of the biggest flaws that he made was he went in there thinking, okay, I'm a businessman. Let's try to get people in here that know what they're doing, that have the experience, and we can work together. We can bounce ideas off of each other. I can use their experience and how they did it. But then he got in there and realized, holy crap, all these people are out to get me. They're out for themselves. They're out for other interests. Like they were taking like things that he was like telling to the FBI and throwing it into the trash in defiance, like stuff that's just like completely criminal, never even heard of before. And I mean, that's when you look at stuff like that, okay? I mean, take Bush for example. When Bush was in power, like Fox News was the biggest propaganda crap that you could possibly think of. No questions asked. No questions about whether or not it's good to go into Iraq, which had absolutely nothing to do with the 9/11 bombings. Like if you believe the official narrative. And, it's kind of interesting how much the media got behind that and how much, like if Trump were to go into like interventionist and go into a war kind of mode, then the media would be completely behind him. Let's say if you wanted to go to war with Iran, for example. And there's also kind of an interesting leak that's kind of came out from Iran, which showed just how much Iranian influence happened with Iraq after the fall of Saddam. I mean, obviously they're not going to trust the U.S. because they took out the one guy that was actually kind of keeping peace in there. So they go to the one people they actually had that they were technically enemies with at one point. And that's kind of a scary thought because when you look at the fact that there was that empty pocket that kind of got in there, it looks like either deep state actors in the FBI, CIA, and the Mossad, stuff like that from Israel, even MI6 from England, just the regular Five Eyes players, really did have a lot to do with creating ISIS. And Iran also had a lot to do with creating ISIS. And I think it's kind of funny because at the same time, too, the same time that Iran was completely controlling Iraqi politics, at the same time that the U.S. was there under Barack Obama, I think it's kind of interesting that we gave Iran the biggest political payout, pretty much. Billions and billions and billions of dollars that were given to Iran when they were still coming up with because it was exposed that they were still trying to enrich uranium. They were still trying to make atomic weapons, or at least get to the point where they could, if they wanted to, start making atomic weapons. And, at the same time that they were funding and helping terrorism in Iraq, and they were working with ISIS and other groups like that, and also Al-Qaeda groups. And it's kind of messed up how, like, the Sunni and Shia, like, they hate each other, but sometimes they'll, like, work with each other or fund each other, even though, like, they're still gonna, like, on the ground, the ISIS people were actually treating, like, Islamicists, like, people that followed Islam but didn't follow their sect of, like, there was the Yazidis, there's, like, all kinds of different, like, types of the religion of peace versions there. And so, like on the ground, they will mercilessly kill each other, but, at the state level, they'll work kind of like to and with each other on certain times if it's to, if it's to fight Israel or if it's to fight it, American interests. But a lot of the times they'll allow those people in there to control the. So it's a real shit show when you think about it. I mean, just take Ukraine, for example. I think it's kind of interesting that they're trying to go after a Ukraine call. I haven't seen anything in the media talk about the fact that there was, at one point, especially under the Obama administration, the fact that it looked like the coalitions fired on both sides of the protesters at the Maidan Square. You don't see that in the media. Yeah, you don't find out about Klitschko, who, even though he is kind of... What's weird is, like, there's, like... I can't explain it. It's like... after the Maidan Square, you had what I think Klitschko was in there. Even though Newland was kind of like saying the complicated electron or whatnot, I think she was referring to that guy. Like, the dude was very neo-Nazi, but at the same time, there's also a lot of like Jewish influence in Ukraine, which is weird because it's like, I don't know. I think it's like a sect of Judaism where they're still kind of like neo-Nazi, but I don't know. It's weird, man. It's honestly can't explain it. But their hatred's more towards communists, and I think that's kind of interesting because at the same time, there's a lot of, if you look at the whole origins of Bolshevism, a lot of those people were Jewish. There's, I don't want to get into the far right kind of thing of saying, oh, it's all the Jews and stuff like that, because I see that all the time, and for me, that's a generalization too. But there are people that do support it, and it's definitely a lot of shady stuff that goes on. I mean, just look at the Mossad influence, and the FBI is working, and the MI6 working together for Epstein. I mean, I think it's kind of getting to the point where, like, there's so much of this information that's coming to the surface about these elite pedophile organizations and all the child sex trafficking that goes on the planet. I think a lot of people are starting to wake up. Like, for me, for example, I'm posting every CBC video that I can. I'm putting Jeffrey Epstein didn't kill himself, and calling out whatever state media that I'm just going to complain about is fake news. And that's kind of what we've came down to today. And I think until more people realize that it's all bullshit, we're kind of doomed in that kind of left-right paradigm. That whole kind of, the state, nanny state kind of logic, of thinking. And I just don't understand how people on the left, and like even further left, like, none of them will call out the fact that the private banking cartels are pretty much have, like, entire nations by the balls economically. I mean, I'm finding more on the left that they don't even really care about economics. They don't even care about fiscal conservatism or, making sure that they, aren't going through a process that bankrupts their nation, like Venezuela, for example. I mean, Venezuela had an amazing amount of production. It has a lot of resources, and it got squandered, mostly through horrible socialist policies. And at least I could only take the left seriously if they were willing to end the Fed in the States. But none of them are willing to end the Fed. In fact, leftism, communism, socialism, centralization is what gives it power. So that's the reason why they'll never be able to have a free, independent society that could compete with a free market system, despite all the flaws that we have, despite all the milking at the top and the people that are able to extract wealth from our society without doing anything, just aside from having those, like, crony capitalist insider connections, which is what we see a lot with especially politicians. I think it's funny how they are, the first ones to go after anybody on small, tiny little process crimes, when they're the ones that make their entire business off of insider trading and, picking and choosing the winners of companies that they can bet against on the stock market, and there's absolutely no repercussions that comes to them whatsoever. It's almost as if they're like by political nature, they are another class above us all. And that's what gets me about people who think, oh, equality, oh, the people are going to run thing, it's all people power. No, that's what they want you to think. There's always going to be a group of people that are maintaining things or running the show, even if you're going, but like, okay, like take the Politburo, for example, in many different communism countries, or even in socialism, there's always stuff like we have here in Canada with like supply management and stuff like that, where what we do is we completely control the means of production to try to like be the arbiters and create a free market within a closed system. Those never work, because the more you try to put those kind of heavy Orwellian control aspects onto people, there's going to be black markets. That is always going to happen when you illegalize. I mean, look at just what we've done with pretty much well, I mean, you could say with the whole kind of like the whole, I guess, the whole welfare system, for example. I mean, it's gotten to a point where it's completely unsustainable if we keep bringing in mass amounts of people with this whole migrant compact. And, you know, as much as they say, oh, well, we need these people to replace, well, no, we're using more resources and we're giving priorities. There's like 800 to 1 million people on waiting lists for subsidized housing here in Canada. And when we brought in all these refugees, we gave them priority over Canadians. And that has, like, even if you're, let's say if you're a leftist, for example, and you give a damn about, socialized, social justice, for example, well, the policies that you have about being so open and accepting are actually completely damaging to anybody who, for one, even if you're not even looking at the cost of of how much of a taxation it is on people to keep these subsidized housing going. I mean, even if you keep that out of the entire equation, you are screwing yourself over. You know, it's almost like you have to have this like this weird mentality, this whole kind of like cluelessness about just following what you're being told. Oh, well, it's morally right to do this. Oh, okay. Well, if it's morally right to do this, well, I don't care if my grandchildren and my children grow up penniless on the nation that their forefathers conquered, as to say an old quote there. But it's true. It's very true. And I just think it's really messed up. It's so hypocritical on the left. I mean, hey, on the right, the only thing that I find that the right goes a little hypocritical on is the whole, war kind of thing, the whole corporate welfare thing, because there are, conservatives that are all for the whole kind of corporate welfare thing. And, the whole kind of race superiority on the far right, where they lump everyone into a category like, oh, we need to take out the Jews, or we need to take out the Arabs, or, well, some of them actually are kind of sympathetic towards the Arabs. I mean, you take the World War II, they were kind of fighting for the side of Hitler and stuff like that. And some of the conservatism and the fascist ideas that are normally associated towards the, I guess what people would call the far right, or the alt-right, are completely in practice and adopted by Muslims and kind of the Sharia law, Islamic laws and stuff like that, which I don't agree with either. So it's kind of one of those things that's where it's like, I think it's like the left believes that if we spend more money, if we borrow more money now to pay for things immediately, and then that bill gets handed to to their kids or their grandkids, then that's completely fine, because what they'll do is for their kids and their grandkids, they'll just print more money out and borrow more money. It doesn't matter. We don't have to pay this money back to anyone. It's not as if there's this whole fucking economic thing called treasuries and futures and different options that oh my god. It's just the fiscal irresponsibility of the left has just kind of made me go more center right. And I mean, I always try to for me, for example, my back's screwed up. I'm a cripple. I mean, as much as I can go out and do things, even though I've got probably maybe one good fight left in me or whatnot. I mean, I keep talking about how I kind of feel like if there was a civil war, I would want to go down to the States, but I feel like by the time I got down there, my back would be like, I need a rocking chair, something to lay down on. Maybe if I was just like sitting there on the ground with like a sniper rifle, picking off people from a long distance or whatnot. But my back's pretty kind of screwed up or whatnot. And I mean, this sounds crazy that I'm talking like this, but I mean, how far is it gonna go? How far are they gonna let the left get away with the amount of crap that they're getting away with? Is it to the point where they've got all of our kids brainwashed and sexually confused in kindergartens and stuff like that? And is it going to be to the point where Trump's in a freaking prison getting like 2 square meals of poisoned food and Epstein per day? And eventually Epstein? I mean, like, that's why I'm worried about Roger Stone and people on the right. They have a legitimate concern about Roger Stone. Some people are saying, oh, he's just a small fish in the whole thing, but not really. Roger Stone's one of the people that got Trump elected. He's one of the major symbols that the left hates so vehemently. And I think it's kind of funny when I was looking at like other people, like I meant to come down to kind of say from an objective centrist leftist kind of viewpoint with Tim Pool, for example, where he was saying, oh, well, it could have just been one person that took out Epstein. It could have just been one person that, they didn't want to be connected to him, or, one crazy person that said, we need to get this guy gone or whatnot. And I think that's kind of bullshit because, I mean, if you look at the circumstances, I mean, there's a certain amount of coincidence that you're allowed to have, and say, okay, well, this happened and this happened. I suppose there could be a coincidence. But when you have, like, at least a dozen things that should not have happened happen at the exact same time, just so happens to work perfectly with the whole kind of narrative, the camera's not working, the guy who was in a cell, who, probably tried to kill him beforehand, gets removed beforehand, they brought in new guards and, and then they, like, falsified and, like, fell asleep, and, these people that were supposed to be, like, checking on you for every half an hour that didn't, like, oh my god, there's just so many freaking things to it, and, like, the fact that, they were like, there was people in the jail that were saying that they heard some struggling for about a minute, and then, people say, oh, breathe, Epstein, breathe. Oh, yeah, right, as they're freaking strangling him. And then, like, the fact that this, Epstein was a big guy. He was in like, even though he was getting up there in age, he was still pretty fit. And I mean, the fact that the coroner came out and said that it looks like it was a murder, because, for one, let's look at the place where, I mean, I don't think they had a actual successful suicide since the 90s in the place where he was in that Manhattan jail that he was held in. They had, like, I think after that suicide in the 90s, they did this whole thing where they suicide-proofed the entire fucking place. And nobody's been able to kill themselves in there pretty much since. But yet, all of a sudden, all these, like, Jeffrey Epstein's able to break his neck in 3 different places, or what, 2 or 3 different places or something like that, compared to the coroner's report. It's so ridiculous. And the more you look into it, the more you realize that, like, okay, whether or not you believe Epstein was like, murdered by specific people or whatnot, there was definitely enough evidence to say that he was murdered. And that's why I believe that a lot of people are doing the Jeffrey Epstein didn't kill himself meme, because it's one of those things where it's if you look into there's enough, like, evidence there to suggest that he did not kill himself, to corroborate the so-called conspiracy theory. And I mean, it got to the point where they tried to do this whole thing with Ukraine with Trump, and they tried to say that, Trump was, what was it again? They were trying to say that freaking, 1 second here, I'm in the middle of something right now. Right now is not a good time. Just put it right there. Okay. Thanks, man. Sorry about that. But anyways, what they tried to say is, with this whole Ukraine thing, with the phone call that he had to the Ukrainian president, I think it's kind of funny how they tried to say that, this is like, they've put the whole impeachment thing on him in this regard, and they're trying to go and say that, what he was trying to do, that whole quid pro quo thing, and I don't understand why they decided to go that route, because Joe Biden, and I think it's funny, it's like he was in front of the Council on Foreign Relations, and if you really want to, like, see and I was trying to say this before I went off the whole thing about John Brennan and the chemtrail thing, because he was talking about how they're going to do the aerosol, stratospheric aerosol injection, or something. I can't remember what the actual term is, but he went out in front and said in the Council on Foreign Relations. And that's why I think if anybody who is kind of questioning the whole importance of globalism and this whole deep state thing, I mean, it almost seems like the Council on Foreign Relations, when they have people that go up there from the deep state, and they brag a lot. I mean, it's ridiculous. You even had Hillary Clinton up there saying, "Oh, I'm so glad that the Department of Defense is just down the road from where you guys are at the Council on Foreign Relations, so I don't have too far to go to be told what to do." And like, that's her practically on an open mic in front of everyone admitting that, Council on Foreign Relations, these globalist NGOs control the, pretty much the foreign policy of the U.S. And I mean, APAC's also a good one to kind of watch, to see people what they have to say there. I definitely don't really, I'm not 100% on board on this whole Israel is the, behind every evil thing on the planet. Because I also get, like, there's people who will try to say that certain people are Jewish when they're not, or certain people are Zionists, but they're not Jewish, not practicing Jews, but they're for Israel. And so, yeah, I kind of understand where that's coming from. And but at the same time, you have to be very careful you don't fall down that whole kind of right side identity politics. I mean, I believe if there's evidence connecting to people to some shady shit, then it should be called out, or the connections should be noted. Or, then go out and start saying, hey, this is my theory, I mean, these guys are affiliated financially and do these certain policies that affect things certain ways that make it look like there's an agenda, then you have the right to call that out. And we all have the right to question things that we don't freaking agree with or don't believe in. I mean, that's the whole part of being freaking, a human. That's the whole part of speaking truth to power. But we've gotten this whole, I think it's weird. It's like, how are we supposed to say or trust any kind of organization that says that they're objective or unbiased, which is total BS, because we all know that, just through omission or what you include or what you talk about, there's going to be some sort of perceived bias or bias, depending on who's making the stories, selecting the stories. It's really hard. And, some people will actually go more for the opinion of certain people and, over like established media narratives. And it's like, how are you supposed to go and how are you supposed to live a society that has, controls in place to stop what they would call disinformation or fake news? I mean, it's so prevalent now where it's practically a poison. And it's funny because fake news, as long as you say that something is fraudulent, it's like, okay, well then what is the correct news is the logical assumption afterwards. And maybe we've gotten past to that point where we'll never be able to have an objective news source again, where it's we're practically having to go and sort it out for ourselves, because we know that certain people may have complete biases towards other or at least a different view on an issue or a problem, stuff like that, right? And it's kind of at the point where it's like, how do we even go about that? I mean, they got this things like NewsGuard, Trudeau is trying, like, up here in Canada, he's about to start passing, well, they're going to try, him and the NDP are going to start trying to pass more legislation to try to crack down on what you can say on Facebook or Twitter and stuff like that. And they're already bad enough as it is. You can't even say Eric Ciaramella, the guy who is the supposed leaker for this, like, fraudulent tape. And it's funny how they keep coming out with more stuff. And I'm watching the Canadian media, and all they are is saying, oh, the walls are closing in for Trump. It's like nothing about the fact that everything that they went on that impeachment hearing for is completely bullshit, and that there was no quid pro quo, and that if you actually look at the quid pro quo, it's Joe Biden. And what's weird is that the mainstream media here in Canada and the mainstream media in the States, aside from Fox News, which is weird because there's certain times where Fox News is just as disingenuous as any other organization out there, or just as full of animus as MSNBC with Rachel Maddow and how she's Trump, Russian collusion, all that crap that exploded into her face and nobody's watching her that much anymore. It's one of those things where it's like, it's almost as if people are living in alternate realities now. It's like the Mandela effect is real, but like it doesn't affect reality as a whole. It just affects individual realities. And I don't want to get all new age and weird stuff like that, but it's definitely a weird kind of run with perception that we've gone, because there's no objective truth anymore. The Socratic method's been abandoned. Nobody makes reasonable, rational arguments anymore when you're watching television. It's just one-side opinion. This is what it is, I see so many times where I don't even, I would like to see them talk about an issue. Here's the issue. Here's people from different sides. This is what they believe. And you know what? I would rather have that kind of news. But the thing is, nowadays, we're so geared into the most extreme headlines. I don't even think objective media, if it was done as I wouldn't say right, but as well as you could possibly do it, I don't think the media would I don't think people would believe it, for one. Some might appreciate it. Some might be like, oh, this is what journalism used to be. Because a lot of media organizations don't even really send reporters to, the scenes. It's all, they'll get a camera crew there, they'll show some footage from someone's cell phone or whatnot, but they won't actually make the effort to go report and follow the leads and do the type of footwork that was heavily, used during the 70s and the 80s, pretty much before this whole technological, wondrous age of Twitter being our news source for a lot of places. And it's sad how, you'll see how news reporters will just talk about social media as if it's the ultimate, and Trump's a little bit kind of guilty towards that too, but at the same time, it's unless he starts having fireside chats, and it's at the same time, what they report on Trump and what they portray him as, up here we're only getting snippets. Our news is only about a few minutes. You maybe get 4 or 5 minutes if it's a really important news story. And in that very small amount of time, they'll tell you what's going on, sort of, but then they'll tell you from one side. They don't have the time to be okay, well, this is what, the Democrats are saying, and this is what they believe, and this is what the Republicans are saying, and or doing an analysis of both and finding out who's right or who's wrong. No, none of that stuff. There's no pursuit of truth anymore. And I think a lot of people are getting, kind of fed up with it, for one, but also kind of awake to it. But the thing is, it seems like it's an overall frustration. Here in Canada, we, the whole politics and stuff like that. And as much as, it wasn't technically a win, a good win, for the Liberals, because we had a ridiculous amount of voters that decided not to turn out, even though we still had a relatively, high voter turnout compared to other countries. There was more people that didn't go for the whole kind of the narrative, so to speak, and a lot of people that didn't certain areas just because of the whole. It's we kind of got Hillaried with this election, even though conservatives won the popular vote, the Liberals won the I guess the different area vote, so they technically won, but they still had kind of a minority government and lost a few seats. So it's kind of one of those things where it's kind of a hit or miss. It's we voted the worst person in. It was just imagine if our media attacked Trump for blackface. Trump would not be even considered reelected. They'd cancel culture his ass so fast in the States if he did a fraction of the stuff that Trudeau did. And Trudeau did stuff that could technically, if we had any balls in our freaking prosecution system here in Canada, we'd go after him, because he should have resigned from all the corrupt, crazy things that he did with his ethics violations, just the amount of stuff that he did with his own people and his own cabinet and stuff. It's just crazy how he practically, is so globalist and big business, and he's got to protect the companies that have paid his family's fortune over the years. A lot of people don't even understand the Desmarais connection, how they practically ran Canada for a good 30 years using Maurice Strong and other corporation, like the Power Corporation of Canada. Like, you know, if they're called the Power Corporation of Canada, you can totally trust them, and they're totally in for your best interest, right? So it's just kind of one of those crazy things. But I've gone on for an hour and like a half almost, so I'm just going to leave it there for now, and we'll see what happens with any kind of new stuff that develops. Hopefully, because I do believe that the only way that we're actually going to look at collectivization and say that it's like, wow, this was a total failure, is an economic collapse. And I think that's going to happen either through the housing bubble market popping here in Canada. I mean, we could easily have another 2008 recession. There's a huge slowdown economically on a global kind of aspect of things. The housing market is completely overpriced in a bubble that's gotten to the point where unless you're ridiculously rich, you almost can't even live in Toronto. Or if you're having to live with like a bunch of other people, it's really kind of made where people who are like poor or middle class. The only way you can be poor or middle class in Toronto nowadays is if you are, if you're like a family that's all pitching together to keep a place, pretty much. And those are cramped conditions, and it's definitely a crunch. It's something that millennials, I notice, are starting to see too, because it's like, I do understand why some people who are kind of like, who are growing, like kids nowadays, it's like, you're trying to compare being let's say if you're going into the workforce just out of school. Well, I mean, you can't deny the facts that it was a lot easier for people in the 50s and the 60s and even the 70s they had the OPEC oil problems and stuff like that, but that was more of a political thing because of that the US elected a retarded peanut farmer. But it's how many people that are growing up now, it's like, it's almost, unless you have your parents or you have like a good job starting out, which is hard for people who are 16, 15, 16, getting into that part where they want to own a car or they want to get their first car and get on the road. It's so ridiculous now. You're paying more insurance than you ever paid for anything that you had on the road when you were, let's say, younger, when you were a teenager, for anybody who's listening to this. And I'm not going to blame it all on boomers. I don't believe in blaming everything on just people that are just trying to, like, make a living for themselves and, like, think about retirement and work their asses off for their whole lives. Those people shouldn't be punished because they're the productive people of our society. There are elders, they're people that, definitely helped get to where we are, So yeah, okay, certain ways that, we've been kind of screwed over by the more older generation, but that's more by the private banking. That's the more of the fact that, like the foreign policies of the West have been probably one of the worst things that have been the contributing to like this huge kind of inflation, this huge disparaging kind of wealth gap between, or making it so that it's just harder to like live a basic life. I mean, there's a lot of people that would love to just work as much as they like, just the bare minimum that they can, and get through life. And back in the day, you were able to like, have tons of those jobs where things weren't as expensive. You may not have made as much of a wage back then, but the dollar was worth more. You were able to work, if people wanted to work just for the bare minimum and survive, they didn't have to work as hard, they didn't have to work as long. And, there's definitely a lot of arguments to be made about that. I mean, trying to get a house nowadays, trying to get a car or, insurance, or God forbid something, get some idiot runs into you. Like, not a lot of people have just like that saved income on the side for that. And people can say, oh, that's on them for being lazy. But at the same time, it's getting harder and harder and harder and to live. And people are my nose is all irritated and stuff because I've been like sick for the past like 3 weeks. So yeah, it was kind of funny when I was doing the Yoda thing. It was hard on my throat. But I was doing some funny things there to kind of like take a break and kind of just like make fun of things, because you got to step back, you got to enjoy things and just kind of appreciate what you have in your life. I mean, for me, here I am, I'm sitting in the damn basement, like I'm one of those mothers. Well, I wouldn't say living with my mom. I'm pitching money and I'm paying money. I'm on disability because my back's screwed and I hate it. I would rather not be dependent on the state whatsoever, but it's kind of at the point where it's hard to do that otherwise, you know. I mean, I'm not really good when it comes to computers, when it comes to programming. I'm more good at when it comes to playing on computers, but, you know, I mean, that's something I think I could learn, but then I would have to go to school for that, and then I'm putting myself back in, you know, debt kind of thing. And it's like, I don't know. I've tried many different work at home things and ideas, but I got like undercut in the market when I was trying to sell Android TV boxes and stuff like that, which were a great idea because it gets you around the Hollywood system of having to pay for stuff and cable-based system of being, you know, of having to watch like TV shows and having to, you know, watch like 20 Vagisil commercials within 3 hours, you know. That's the good thing about like the Android TV boxes. I can watch whatever I want. And I think a lot of people need to kind of like start doing that, start looking at ways that they can counteract the system. And a lot of people are, but it's not enough. Thing is, though, it's when you get to that tipping point. I mean, the arguments that they made back in the day for... Oh, I'm still going on, aren't I? Yeah. Anyways, the arguments that they made about, you know, the 3% back in the day for the U.S., you know, a very small percentage of the population that rose up and fought the English, when it was actually a very unpopular idea at the time on the overall kind of scheme of things, you know? So, I mean, when are we going to be able to, like, look at that example and be like, how much are we going to put up with this tyranny? You know, how much longer are we going to have these people who are going to rip us off, are going to tax us, are not going to represent us, are going to take our vote, are going to give it to some freaking unelected foreign entity from some, you know, globalist one world government superpower that does not give a damn about us? And this is what I talk to people. I mean, for me, voting is a tiny bit of representation. It's not even really anything that accomplishes anything on an individual level. I mean, yeah, you get enough people to vote, and then obviously you're going to get that person in, and things are going to change. But it's like, how do you get to the point where you're, you know, where we get to the point where people realize that it's all you know, just this giant illusion. It's just this giant show to try to get us all to think a certain way, you know? I mean, that's what I think is kind of weird. It's like trying to get people to see things outside of their own perspective is hard to do. Like, historically, it's usually some sort of catastrophic change that is the thing, like an economic disaster or whatnot, or, you know, like a natural disaster, stuff like that that'll break the economy, or you know, certain things like that happen that do change things, or do put us into a thing where it's like really bad. But I mean, it's like, what gets me about the left, and I've said this many different times, is that like how they believe in giving up, like they've gone more authoritarian because they're all about like controlling everything that you can do, you know. And I just want less control. I want more free markets. I want people to be able to like not get taxed into a ridiculous kind of slavery, you know. I mean, it's hard for a lot of small businesses to compete with these big businesses that work with leftist and socialist kind of like the same, you know, things that they say that they're against, the 1%, the wealthy or whatnot. The left loves, like they are if you look at the Democrats, they're billionaires, they're millionaires and billionaires because of all the years of insider trading. You know, they're the biggest hypocrites. And that's my problem with the left is just the hypocrisy. I mean, I've actually... Oh, there's definitely hypocrisy on the right, though. I mean, I tried going to a Discord service called The Right Side or something like that. And, you know, I go in there, I'm like, hey, how's it going? And, of course, right from the beginning, they're talking about, being all alpha and, you know, hating on fags and racists and stuff like that. And all they're doing is talking heavily... like, all it was just them, like, saying a whole bunch of gay shit, which is making me thinking, like, are these guys projecting? Because it seems like they're kind of being a little homo about the homo stuff, if you get what I'm talking about, right? And so I'm just like, okay, are we going to talk about anything of substance? And then they start bringing up, like, oh, we need to start bringing God back in schools and stuff like that. And I'm like, oh, okay, well, it's an argument. But at the same time, they start saying, it happened to get into this whole thing about the Catholic Church and all that stuff. And so... obviously, I couldn't help but bring up the fact that there's, you know, the Catholic Church, for example, for the Republican Christians, the Republican Catholics. Like, how do you even, like, justify your existence as a Republican Catholic. Because, I mean, you have the Pope that's preaching nothing but Marxism and communism, and is, like, saying anything that is, like, free market is evil, and at the same time involved in huge pedophile fucking conspiracies and, like, child sex trafficking. And, I mean, it's like Lapel ended up getting, like, tried for all the freaking pedophilia and all the sex trafficking and stuff that he was doing. I mean, it's so prevalent. And once I started saying that, like, I started pointing out the hypocrisy of the kind of the Catholic side of things, it only took me about 20 minutes before I got banned. And it's funny because here they are, these people who are like these bastions of, we believe in free speech, and the left, they're the ones trying to censor everything. They're the first ones that if you, like, if you, like, they're so authoritarian that you can piss them off so easily just by, like, not even really trying to piss them off. Like, I wasn't trying to troll them. I was just telling them, well, there's a bit of a hypocrisy here when, you're saying that, everyone should be Catholic and should have, like, these Catholic right-wing societies when there's rampant pedophilia and problems within those societies too. Once you call out those problems, then the authoritarians are like, nope, it's not happening, you're banned. And then, like, they try to, like, message me again to see if I want to join their, like, server where I could, like, potentially be welcomed back into the collective fold. Oh, my life is no meaning without being part of the far-right side Discord server. Oh, I did not know how I would be able to hold myself at the... the boys will look at me at the golf club and just think that I'm the lowest. Oh, no. It's like, fuck off, man. Have, like, some fucking, consistency. But they're, like, the same people who are authoritarian. And that's what my problem is with authoritarians. I hate people on the left and right who want to control everything and are completely hypocritical and don't follow by the same rules of law that they try to impose on everyone else. It's just the whole kind of practice what you preach sort of thing. And I see that so much on certain parts of the left and right. But I see it definitely more on the left. People on the right who actually, like, there's a lot more people on the right that I've noticed that aren't completely far right on this whole kind of, like, Nick Fuentes thing and the whole kind of infighting that they're having on right now. It's definitely something that needs to be put in there because, obviously some of the people on the neocon establishment were the first ones that were all about not, Trump is they'd say everything bad about him. But now that Trump's in there and it's this huge populist following, they're trying to get themselves in there to try to co-opt it. And so I definitely see the need for both people who are American first, the people that got Trump elected, the ones that want to see, things go for America, And hey, some people may have, like, their mixed things on the whole Israel-Palestinian, American support of Israel, like, you name it. I mean, there's definitely arguments to be had. But the thing is, I'm also seeing that there's a lot of, like, animus of people that are possessed to the point where they're ready. And I'm kind of at the point where, to be honest with you, if I had to choose a side, I definitely would go for the right. Just because it's, they're not as, like, the people that think that everybody is Richard Spencer. The thing is, Richard Spencer is a total joke. He was working for the Democrats beforehand. That whole, like, nobody really takes him seriously on the right, and people who are conservative or Republican don't believe in, a lot of them don't believe in the whole kind of race-based politics, the authoritarianism, because they've openly said that they don't want free speech and stuff like that. A lot more people are for free speech, and I think that's a winning issue. That's something that we should always stay on, not just because I think that it has a chance of succeeding. It's because, free speech is the freaking cornerstone of the best parts of Western civilization. It's what keeps us freedom. It's what gives us that kind of ability to censor, not censor, but to expose. I mean, the people that will censor you, showing how that, it's just a man behind a curtain kind of thing, or how they're just a bunch of glass titans that, rule our lives, but don't follow with what they're actually doing themselves. It's a lot of that hypocrisy going on. But anyways, it's hour 35 minutes. I got to deal with a couple things, I guess. So people trying to phone me and all that jazz. So thank you very much for listening to my rants. And I don't really post a lot of videos there, mostly because it's like, I don't know, man. It's hard. I'm dealing with a lot of crap in my life, and all this kind of craziness. It's like I want to kind of like try to do stuff, but it's at the same time, it's like, what's the point? The more subscribers I get on YouTube, the bigger target and like possibility of me getting censored. I should probably start posting more videos and stuff like that on like BitChute and everything like that, but I don't know. It's kind of one of those things where it's like I'm just kind of waiting for what's gonna happen. I feel like there's gonna be some crazy stuff that's gonna be coming down the line in a few years, so maybe even a year. So I mean, it could be right on our doorstep, as far as I know. But something's definitely happening. And anyways, thank you guys very much for listening to my rants. I appreciate it. I mean, anybody that actually listens to what I'm talking about for this long deserves a medal by any means. And thank you guys very much. Keep on rocking in the free world, and peace out.